Welcome to the Sirius report. This is Paul, and today I'm assessing the fact that China has made threatening statements with respect to the US, and certainly as far as the United States is concerned, and we'll come on to the reasons why, and why it is rallying global South countries to defy US tariff policies. Now, I don't want to get into a big, long discussion about how the United States has been challenging and threatening China for a number of years with previous trade wars, trying to crush Huawei, trying to prevent China having access to semiconductors, etc. Now, it's all well and good Chinese spokespeople coming out with statements which basically reinforce the view that until the United States plays ball and shows China respect, there will be no negotiations. However, despite these comments, I want to draw on reference to statements made by the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, who is one of Xi's closest confidants, right-hand man, so to speak, very important in the Chinese Politburo. And he came out with a number of questions, which were, to more of my way of thinking, statements, what was termed the international community, meaning the global South, in what was termed countering US policy on imposing, all these enormous tariffs upon China's trading partners. Now, Wang came out and said, as the United States wields its tariff stick worldwide, note, every country has to make a decision. And this was said at a meeting of the foreign ministers of BRICS countries and partner countries in Brazil. Now, most people will assess these statements as just being questions and maybe not as inflammatory as I'm suggesting. However, I know the Chinese mindset and I know how the United States really feels about China. So whenever China comes out with these statements, the US sees it as being very threatening. They see it as aggressive because in their mindset, China wants to be an hegemonic power like the United States has been since World War II. Now, the fact that's not a reality is beside the point. If the United States thinks it's true, then it is true as far as they're concerned. So they will interpret these statements made by Wang as being threatening and aggressive. So Wang came out and started by saying, shall we allow the world to regress into a lawless jungle where might makes right? Shall we accept that one country's self-interest may override the collective good of others? Shall we stand idle as international rules are trampled and discarded? Will any nation truly be able to protect its own interests through compromise and flinching? That is a very powerful statement in the sense that it's not only a challenge to the rules-based order, to US hegemony, and the fact that the United States makes up rules as they go along and then changes the rules and basically ignores all international rules in the process, and is seeking to override the collective good, meaning the multipolar world. And the final sentence in that statement, of course, is we need to protect ourselves and we shouldn't compromise or flinch in the face of the American bully. Now, the United States will perceive that as being extremely aggressive. In essence, they will see that as a call to arms, in inverted commas, not literally military arms, and a rallying cry for the global South countries to stand up to the United States. And the United States, of course, will react very badly to that. Because even though in principle, of course, it acknowledges the multipolar world is the future, it wants the multipolar world to be a future in which somehow the United States is still the dominant power. The United States has the world reserve currency. And basically the status quo hasn't changed, which of course is not going to happen. Another point, of course, that Wang makes was, shall we submit to a unipolar hegemony bent on dominance, or shall we forge a multipolar world built on equality and order? Well, that's again another direct challenge to say we have to stand up to the United States collectively. We cannot allow them to continue to pursue their dominant hegemonic behavior, even though, of course, we know now it's in serious decline. And the future is the world we all strive to achieve, which is based on equality, order, meaning there is a rules-based order. We all behave ourselves and treat each other with respect and equality. Another point that Wang makes is history admits no regression and justice lies in the heart of the people. That's really trying to appeal to the base case of how people should feel. And it's absolutely right. At the end of the day, we're in the 21st century. We should not be submitting to the whims of any nation. I don't care whether it's China, the United States, Russia, or anyone else. We should be well past that. It should never have happened, of course, but the fact we're talking in 2025 as though that's still a problem is frankly a damning indictment on us collectively as humanity. He also goes on to say China's stance on the trade war is clear and resolute. If it is imposed upon us, we will fight to the end. If negotiation is sought, it must be based on equality and respect. Now, the US is getting totally bent out of shape when China says we will fight to the end because they don't really understand what that means. Their definition of fighting is warring, military conflict. They don't understand China's fight is going to be done on the basis of economics, of finance, of galvanizing the will of the Chinese people to agree to this change in relations between the two countries, what that will mean to them collectively and individually. He also comes out and says what China seeks to defend extends beyond its own legitimate rights, as it also seeks to safeguard the shared interests of all. Now, that really will antagonize the Americans because that says two things principally. Firstly, this is not just about us, but we think we have to protect the interests of the rest of the global South countries. But also what it says is to the United States, we intend to help those nations protect their interests. So again, the US will see that as being a very aggressive statement. And then the final point with regards to what Wang said is what China upholds is not just mutually beneficial cooperation, but the integrity of international rules. And what China stands for is not merely its national dignity, but a world where fairness and justice prevail. Now, the reference to national dignity in part is the 100 years humiliation that China suffered, and it has no intention ever again of being put in that position. So it regards protecting itself in that regard at any cost. But it also sees that as an extension to the rest of the world where it goes, well, in part, you have not suffered our humiliation, but you've suffered your own humiliation. And that cannot continue either. Now, again, the United States will perceive that as an aggressive call by China to global South countries to say, we have to stand up to the Americans. And they are saying that, but the interpretation of what they mean is going to be very different between what China's saying, what China's meaning, and how the United States will interpret that. And that's something that's extremely important for us to understand with regards to this whole discussion. But I can't emphasize enough, this is going to be perceived in Washington as a direct threat to the United States. The fact it's come from Wang, they will perceive, well, that basically is what Xi's perspective is on this, because anything Wang says in this regard will have been agreed in the Chinese Politburo, and Xi's the leader, of course. So ultimately, unlike many other countries, the buck stops with him. He genuinely is a true leader, unlike Western countries where our presidents and prime ministers are not leaders, as we know. So, on the basis of this, unless the United States radically changes its attitudes and perspective and treats China with respect and as an equal partner, then there will be no end to this trade war. And the US thus far has completely underestimated what China is capable of doing. And it has many weapons in its arsenal, so to speak, not least in terms of dumping US treasuries, US assets. It can also, and has done, and we've talked about this in other podcasts, sort alternative supply chains, import markets. One obvious example is soybeans from Brazil. They could also sever ties with US companies in totality. They could make potentially the investment environment in China difficult for US companies, or just make the environment for US companies to operate in China difficult. I'm not saying they will do that, but they could threaten that and put huge pressure on the US, because the business community in the United States is extremely powerful in the grand hierarchy of who people perceive have spheres of influence over US government. This could ultimately lead to decoupling on steroids. There will never be decoupling in totality, but it could be significantly reduced by 80-90%, which is going to completely upend China-US relations. And what, of course, doesn't help, ironically, is the United States has this terrible tendency of being handed a grenade and then it pulls the pin out and blows itself up in the process. Now, the Trump administration still has serious issues with Iran. We spoke about the very threatening statements made by Hegseth. Well, Trump's now come out and said, we are not trading with anyone who is obviously trading with Iran. Now, China is Iran's biggest oil export market. So is Trump basically saying, we're not going to trade with China anymore? In which case, China can stand there and say, well, if that's your perspective, your choice, fine. We will decouple from you in totality. And we don't have a problem with that. We can easily find alternative markets. We will do so. The idea that somehow the United States tariff policies were going to destroy China are nothing more than dreams in the minds of those who have sleepless nights every night of every week of every year about the fact that they fear China to become this dominant hegemonic power that will run the world based on communism and threaten everything the United States believes to be how the world should be run. This is all in their minds. It's not reality. But when even an illusion becomes that powerful, it can seem like a reality, as it does to Americans, but not all Americans, but particularly in the Beltway. Now, making these threats about Iran, China is going to ignore it. It will continue to import oil. It will not care. And if necessary, it can be sanctioned by the United States. But as I said, that will just cause China to retaliate in the manner we are seeing. And also, it will say to the global south, look, this is what happens if you were to succumb to the United States. Ultimately, they don't want to sign deals with you to make life easier for you. They want to sign deals with you to make you subservient to a dying US hegemonic empire. That's why we come back to the original statement made. China is threatening the United States. The United States will perceive this threat to be far worse than it actually is, although it's pretty strong statements. when you read between the lines what Wang said. But definitely this is a rallying call to global south countries to say you must defy the United States' tariff policies, you must not compromise, you must not flinch, you must want to push ahead and forge a world based on equality, based on a true rules-based order, based on true globalization. Everything that should allow the world to progress together in harmony and for the next 100, 500, 1,000 years or even longer. And with that, we end today's podcast. Thank you very much for listening, for all your ongoing support, which we greatly appreciate. Please like, share, subscribe, comment, spread the word, because never has it been more important in the world we live in today to be informed and absolutely not entertained. And with that, I'll say goodbye.